Back to our reading. Probably forgot where we were, right? Well, that's okay, because we're going to recap a little bit, because we have to go back to realize exactly, to appreciate everything in today's reading. Let's go back to Noah. Rainbows and unicorns. The world that God created had turned evil and violent, so God decided to wipe everything out, even the people, and start over with Noah. Yet after God did that, God decided that wiping everything out wasn't going to get what he wanted, so he decided to change tactics. He would choose one couple, Abram and Sarai, whose names would eventually change to Abraham and Sarah. He made a deal with them, a threefold promise. God promised to give them a family, and that family would grow into a mighty nation. He promised a land for that family to live in, and he promised to bless them and make their name great so that the whole world would be blessed through them. So bless one family in order to bless the whole world. Abraham and Sarah finally did have a child, and what was his name? Anybody remember? His name was Isaac, which means laughter, because Sarah laughed that she would have a baby in her old age. Isaac and his wife Rebekah had two sons. Anybody remember those? Jacob and Esau. Jacob and his wives, Rachel and Leah, and not to mention the concubines, had 12 boys and a girl. We won't name all the boys, but we will name the famous boy. Anybody remember his name? Joseph. You probably remember him because of his coat, his amazing Technicolor dream coat. He wrote a musical, went on Broadway, became very famous. Actually, I think Andrew Lloyd Webber might have wrote that musical. But Joseph's story is in keeping with the promise and the blessing of his family. Joseph's name was made great, and he actually was a blessing to the whole world. Joseph was his father's favorite, and his father made no secret that he was his favorite, hence the fancy coat that he got. His brothers were jealous, and with his father's favoritism, the Bible teaches us lots of lessons, like even if you have a favorite child, don't let anybody know about it, because they might throw him in a pit and sell him into slavery and tell you that he is dead, because that's what Joseph's brothers did. Joseph is blessed, though, we find out in our reading. He becomes great, but he went through the ringer. Sold into slavery by his brothers, sexually harassed by Potiphar's wife, falsely accused and thrown into prison. But what could he do? Joseph had told her that he had all this authority. He said, nobody's greater than me in the house, not even Potiphar. But she showed him that she had more power than he did. And that's what happens when people of power abuse people without power. In Potiphar's wife's case, she had power over Joseph, who was an immigrant slave. She sexually harassed him, then punished him for refusing her advances. We have these issues yet today. Our society is still dealing with sexual harassment, though things are changing. So Joseph is sold into slavery, sexually harassed, falsely accused, and imprisoned. Not fun. Yet God did not forget his promise, that threefold promise. God did not forget that. You might say, what? Look at all the stuff he went through. But Joseph was blessed as he went through those troubles. God didn't promise that bad things wouldn't happen to Abraham and his descendants, but he promised to walk with them and bless them in order to bless the whole world. How does what happened to Joseph bless the whole world? Well, we do find out at the end of Joseph's story that because of him, Egypt learned how to save food so that when the drought came and Egypt and the rest of the world was starving, they had food. So God through Joseph not only saved the Egyptians, but he saved the whole world from starvation. But there's more. Recently, I was visiting with someone, and I told them about a phrase that I really like. You've heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, where someone goes through a terrible experience, something really bad happens to them, and it makes it very difficult for them to just live out their life. It's a terrible thing. They need time, they need patience, they need community supporting them, they need help, they need therapy. Well, I've heard a phrase related to that I really like. It's called post-traumatic stress opportunity. Now, this is not in any way to make light of people that go through post-traumatic stress disorder as they struggle to cope. It's just that maybe we can look for possible positive opportunities to come out of this terrible tragedy. It means taking what we learn when we go through really hard times and use the wisdom and experience that we learned to help other people as they're going through terrible things. For example, a number of people that work in support groups like AA. I was just talking to someone whose brother is an alcoholic, and went through a terrible, terrible experience, now is a counselor up in Hazleton. Not everybody who works in these support groups have gone through this, but some have, and they use their experience and their wisdom to help other people. That's one way that God works through these tragedies, to bless other people. And in Joseph's case, God works through these things through people to help others. Now, the obvious thing that this story tells us about God is that God keeps his promises. God gave his word to bless Abraham's family and his descendants, and he kept his promise. We can see that through Joseph's story. Even though all these bad things happened to Joseph, God walked with him and blessed him. God keeps his promises. God promised you in the waters of baptism to love you, forgive you, and walk with you forever. That's a promise we can hold on to. Maybe and hopefully our troubles won't get anywhere near what Joseph went through. And maybe our blessings won't get as high as Joseph's has. But we know that God walks with us. When you think of the founding fathers of our country, one name that until recently didn't come up too often was Alexander Hamilton. He did a lot of things for our country, but usually you didn't hear too much about him, except now when the musical has come out, and now he's become very popular. People are looking into him and into the other founding fathers. One of the things that I've learned through this is that Alexander Hamilton was really good friends with George Washington. He was not good friends with Thomas Jefferson or James Madison. In fact, Hamilton and Jefferson fought. They were like on opposite sides. You know, we were in a young country that had no rules, no foundation, and these founding fathers and mothers had to put together some rules of how this country's going to work. And Hamilton and Jefferson were on opposite sides. Now, in the musical, Jefferson and Madison sing this song about the preferential treatment that they believe that Hamilton got because he was good friends with George Washington, who was president at the time. The song goes like this. It must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side. It must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side. Because Hamilton was bringing up this legislation and it was getting pushed through because he was good friends with Washington. On Wednesday night, we changed the words a little bit to this song, and it goes like this. It must be nice to have Yahweh on your side. It must be nice to have Yahweh on your side. One of the names of God in the Old Testament is Yahweh. The definition of Yahweh means the eternal sovereign, the ever-present helper who is always with you. It must be nice to have Yahweh on your side. God walks with you. I want to share a poem from Pastor Alicia McBride entitled Lost Ocean Strong. She writes, "There is an ocean of troubles ahead of me, and I wish they were intended for someone instead of me. I question whether I am strong enough to endure, if I will last long enough and be sure. I often get lost in these feelings of woe is me." And then she writes, "Until I awaken every morning and see my boys gently sleeping, soft and secure in the knowledge they are loved." That's what this is about. This mother is anxious, yet she learns peace from her children who live in the peace in the knowledge that they are loved and cared for. Joseph teaches us that God loves us and cares for us. It must be nice to have Yahweh on your side. It is nice. Realize it is nice for you. Yahweh is on your side. You are loved. Rest in the knowledge of that love. Amen.